Hi boys and girls. Today we're going to talk about finding least common denominators. Finding a least common denominator is just like finding a least common multiple, but finding a least common denominator means that we're looking at two or more fractions and finding the least common multiple of the denominators. So if you take the fractions 1/6 and 1/4 and look for the common denominators, you're finding the common multiples. Remember, finding common multiples is like skip counting. I talked before about skip counting by 2 is listing the multiples of 2. So the multiples of 2 are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and so on. You're going to do the same thing when you're looking for multiples of denominators. So I want you to pause the video and I want you to write down all of the multiples of this denominator, which is 6, and this denominator, which is 4. You'll list all your multiples, not all of them, maybe list 5 or 6 of them, right here and right here for 1/6 and 1/4. The multiples of 6, which is the denominator of this fraction, are 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, etc. It keeps going. The multiples for the denominator of this fraction, which is 4, are 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20. Now, for these lists of multiples that you have here, I'd like you to make a list of common multiples. So the common multiples that you have listed here of 6 and 4. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. For common multiples, if you take the list that we came up with here, you should definitely have 12, and then I kept going and I also came up with 24 because both 6 and 4 have 24 as a common multiple. And so now, of course, we look for our least common multiple, and the least common multiple is always the smallest. Least is the same as smallest, and in this case, the least common multiple of 6 and 4 is 12. And the least common multiple and the least common denominator will always be the same. This is just repetitious, because the least common denominator of 2 or more fractions is the least common multiple of the denominators. And since we're talking about denominators when we make these lists, the common multiple and the common denominator will always be the same. So the least common denominator for 1/6 and 1/4 is 12. The main reason that we find least common denominators is so that we can make equivalent fractions. If you take 1/6 and you convert it to a new fraction with the denominator of 12, well, you have to figure out the steps in getting there. So the first thing to do is to figure out, how do you take 6 and convert it to 12? Well, I know that 6 times 2 equals 12. And whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. And so I take 1 times 2, and that equals 2. If you worked backwards now to check your work and you reduce this number, you would come up with this number, fraction. Do the same thing for 1/4. So how do you take 4 and turn it into 12? It's not magic, it's multiplied by 3. If you do the same thing to the numerator, you will end up with 1 times 3 is 3. And again, if you checked your work and you reduced 3/12, you would have 1/4. So just to give you a visual here, this is 1/6 and this is 2/12, and they are indeed equivalent. And this is 1/4 and this is 3/12, and those are equivalent. For your practice today, I would like you to find the least common denominators of 1/3 and 1/2. So you'll start with the denominator of 3, list out the multiples of 3, then you'll find the multiples of 2, list them out, find the common multiples of 3 and 2, find the least common multiple from that list, which is going to be the same as the least common denominator. When you make your list for 3 and 2, I would say to make at least 5 or 6 multiples in that list. On the back of your notes, I want you to tell me why you think it's important to be able to find least common denominators. In other words, what can you do with these fractions now that they have common denominators that you could not do with them before?